The tragic life of a Chinese man, the grandfather I never met. A person's thoughts, abilities, and family upbringing are closely intertwined. In China, political vetting often extends back 3 generations. So let's start with my paternal grandparents. In the 1980s, my grandfather fell victim to the Cultural Revolution. Tortured and tormented, he was buried in an unmarked grave in a remote mountain valley. During the pandemic in 2022, our family restored his tomb and erected a headstone. It was also during this time that my distant paternal aunt shared information about my grandfather with me. He was an upright man who, during the Cultural Revolution, was arrested by members of my maternal grandfather's clan and other townspeople. Despite enduring various forms of torture, he refused to confess to any crimes and tragically died in prison. His death remained a taboo topic, a gray speck of history that weighed heavily on our family. What can the families of victims do after their loved ones pass away due to political persecution? What actions are available to them? I'll sadly share that it's not about seeking retribution or pointing fingers. In the past, rural society in China operated like a web of alliances and power struggles. Similar to ancient land annexation, powerful clans held sway over key locations such as transportation hubs, water sources, reputation, clan strength, and official connections. They occupied strategic land near crossroads, and if they blocked a path, isolated families couldn't even access their own land. For the families of victims, the only option was to forget, to suppress memories of their lost ones, and to extend goodwill toward those responsible. They had to reintegrate into rural society. As for the pressures faced by my parents' generation, I can only imagine. The nickname my father was given, XXX son, with XX being my grandfather's name, carried both mockery and sympathy. The weight of history, like a grain of dust from a bygone era, settled upon our family. The tragedy of my grandfather's life remains etched in our collective memory, a silent testament to the tumultuous times he endured. Mother's rift with the family. My grandfather was an honest and impoverished man. One of my father's happiest childhood memories was finding a few peanuts that had fallen onto the road after the harvest and joyfully sharing them with his family. My grandfather and maternal grandfather, both minor officials, were once close friends. In our village, the bride price was exorbitant, and my maternal grandparents often boasted in public that they would pay the bride price for my father. After my grandfather passed away, the clan insisted that my father marry my mother. This was partly to honor my maternal grandparents' promise of assistance with the bride price, which meant that my father's family wouldn't have to go to extreme lengths to afford a wife. It was a direct fulfillment of my maternal grandparents' past promise. Additionally, my mother was emotionally volatile and of short stature. The marrying her was also a gesture of goodwill towards my maternal grandfather's clan in hopes of reintegrating into rural society without being ostracized due to my grandfather's death. However, my maternal grandparents reneged on their word. They took the bride price and gave it to the clan for business ventures, leaving my mother to marry my father with nothing but her bedding. Her outburst at the wedding did nothing to change the situation. Consequently, my parents embarked on an even poorer and more burdensome peasant life. The clan members on my father's side also harbored deep-seated implications towards my mother because of the bride price issue. A poor and broken family. I born in the 1990s amidst the tide of reform. My father went abroad for business, leaving my mother to care for me alone. Against the backdrop previously described, my mother's emotional state became increasingly unstable. One moment she would be all smiles, and the next, she might turn to physical punishment. My parents' marriage was fraught with strife, with loud arguments and physical altercations that sometimes led to injuries. Perhaps due to these early experiences, I grew up to be reclusive, isolating myself from the outside world. I couldn't grasp others' emotions or read their facial expressions, and I didn't know how to make friends. I was also afraid of classmates discovering my family's poverty. I never told them where I lived and would carefully tread the narrow path home after school, dreading being seen. I vividly remember one instance when classmates unexpectedly showed up at my humble abode, calling out my name from outside the window. Caught off guard, I instinctively hid under the stove, silent, until they left after peering through the door for a while. I don't recall when I emerged from hiding, but I remember feeling ashamed. Textbooks and teachers taught me not to be vain, yet I couldn't face my simple home and cheerful classmates without feeling shame. Children from impoverished backgrounds inevitably face subtle discrimination, reflecting society's most candid views. In films, lineage, social status, and moral character are often linked. The downtrodden prince is always noble, the lost rich son is always superior, and the poor farmer's child is always cunning. Elementary school children, influenced by these narratives, also believed this to be true. When a classmate lost a digital watch, I was accused of stealing it simply because of my family's poverty, and they relentlessly demanded its return. This saddened me for a long time, and if not for the lack of money, I would have bought him a new one. I believe that poverty and moral depravity are not directly related. Rather, poverty is more likely to lead to a broken home, and children raised in such environments are more likely to develop severe character flaws. Those with character flaws find it harder to integrate into society, and our inability to do so makes it even more challenging to achieve a higher social status. A lower social status leads to greater poverty, and impoverished families perpetuate their own tragic cycles. Poverty and character flaws should not be reasons for societal blame. We, the underprivileged, lack the capacity to harm China. In contrast, powerful entities like the Sanlu Group and individuals like Putin, with their marketing prowess, are the ones capable of harming the people. A poor and broken family, malnutrition and game addiction. The societal and scientific perspectives in China are truly outdated. My mother, with her scarce leisure time, indulges in watching dramas and fantastical TV shows, from which she has adopted parenting beliefs that are laughable today. A filial son comes from the stick. Being the top scholar brings pride and relief. Filial piety moves heaven and earth, and suffering is a gift to life. She also learned various ingredients and cooking methods believed to reduce internal heat or greatly nourish from the streets, leading me to consume fish with scales barely removed and poultry soups made without blanching the meat. Perhaps due to a psychological shadow cast by these soups, I still refrain from eating chicken and duck to this day. However, as meat is considered heaty and inflammatory, my mother seldom purchased it, occasionally cooking red mushrooms, deer antler, bird's nest, and duck fat to nourish me, which speaks volumes about my nutritional state. I've been extremely thin all my life and have suffered from severe rhinitis and gastroenteritis. When in discomfort, the local quack would often administer antibiotics, and upon visiting the town, I received even more bizarre injections. To cure my ailments, I've tried various folk remedies, loquat leaf concoctions, vinegar, grass, and even cat saliva. I do not blame my parents, as these futile thoughts are widespread in China. It might take a true long-term cultural revolution to break free from these antiquated notions and the brainwashing of consumerist advertorials. My severe rhinitis and gastroenteritis constantly affected me, rendering me unable to concentrate on my studies. My incessant sneezing even disrupted my classmates, for which I am truly sorry. Yet, these chronic illnesses did not hinder my gaming or novel reading. Even in the throes of a severe episode, I persisted in playing games. Had I shown the same dedication to my studies, perhaps I could have moved to China. I am not a person of strong will. Back then, I might have found a haven to escape reality. In truth, I have always felt that playing games with the sole aim of winning is exhausting, as tiring as work or study. I don't actually enjoy gaming. I am merely fearful of reality. The education system in China transforms children into silent cogs. From a young age, we are constantly admonished and educated by teachers and parents with a myriad of instructions like, be honest as a person, obey the rules in your actions. If we feel aggrieved by this and suffer losses, they wave the banner of, I'm doing this for your own good, or, it's all for your benefit. Lost in the myriad of admonitions and film narratives, we fail to think for ourselves. We don't understand human nature, how society operates, or the boundaries between morality and law. It is precisely because of this rigid education that a well-behaved middle school student named Xiao Guang from Handan was beaten to death and buried, while those who do not regard teachers and parents as authorities, the mischievous and bold, grow up to be more likely to succeed. In contrast to honesty, beguiling the public is the key to power and wealth. Politicians who promise the moon to appease the people deceive them with their pretense of fairness and selflessness, thereby seizing power and becoming bureaucrats. Businessmen with false marketing mislead the public's perception, amass wealth, and collude with bureaucrats to become the elite. As for discipline, it's absurd. We're nitpicked down to the position and orientation of brushes and cups, and how neatly we fold our blankets into tofu blocks. Long-term adherence to such discipline subtly guides us to abandon thought, to comply, to unconditionally accept orders. This reminds me of soldiers, whose ability to think is eroded by strict discipline, blindly following the orders of bureaucrats. The tragedy of '89 saw soldiers, at the behest of bureaucrats, turn their guns on the people. Soldiers who lose the ability to think may be able to operate the war machine to its fullest extent, but soldiers are first and foremost human beings. Without thought, they can no longer be called human. Society and the government teach us to obey discipline and accept exploitation, while countless bureaucrats and opportunists who step outside of discipline profit from it. Caught in the phrase, it's all for your good, we are at a loss. We are reformed by education, pressed to the bottom of society, functioning like silent cogs between work and our children. We still harbor the illusion that under the government's brain, the command and coordination will lead to common prosperity for both society and the individual. The lash of society, yet the promise of shared prosperity never materialized. After finishing high school, I got into an ordinary university. Over the years, my father endured many beatings abroad and lost many employees. But fortunately, he saved some money and was eager to return and develop his business in China. During my university years, he even made me a shareholder in his company. And then, like most young people, I graduated, got a job, married, and bought a house. While working, I anonymously exposed some industry secrets and state-owned company scandals online, which quickly led to my dismissal and a reprimand from the police station. It was just as well, as I was disgusted by the industry's dark side and was looking for a change anyway. Time passed, and it seemed everything was getting better. However, my lack of legal awareness and my father's limited perspective eventually led to trouble. My bank accounts and house were suddenly frozen by the court. The court documents informed me that I had signed an unlimited liability guarantee agreement for the company, and since my father's company defaulted on a bank loan, they were seeking compensation from me. As I sought confirmation from my father, I recalled the situation at the time. I had just turned 18 when I started university, and my father's company needed my signature for a loan. Rushed by my father, lacking legal awareness, and without the bank informing me of the consequences on the spot, I didn't even read the document's content and naively signed the bank's papers. Disaster struck. I lost my house, my savings, and I was blacklisted by the credit system, casting a shadow over my life once again. The restriction on high consumption is a joke to me. As a frugal person, I've never been willing to take high-speed trains, nor have I ever stayed in hotels. I am in the midst of suffering. In the midst of suffering, the court and the bank forcibly auctioned my property, rendering my years of effort futile. I finally understand why the government encourages people to marry and have children. When one has nothing left, it becomes all too easy to lash out and seek revenge against society. Fortunately, my wife and children have not abandoned me. I also realize that the security measures for the bureaucratic elites who oppress the lower class are stringent. The news reports of those seeking revenge on society have had no impact whatsoever on these elites. Instead, they retaliate against fellow struggling citizens, a self-destructive act among comrades. Now, my wife and I can only find odd jobs to support our family. However, the income of China's lower-class citizens is insufficient to sustain a household. My upbringing and anti-consumerist beliefs allow me to maintain an extremely frugal lifestyle. But my wife and children cannot endure the judgmental gazes of relatives and friends. They long for an ordinary life like their peers. Maybe one day my little family will be torn apart. I know that the cause of all this suffering lies with the bureaucratic elites and opportunists who silently plunder the fruits of our labor. I am lost, unsure of what to do or how to save myself and the countless families facing similar tragedies. In my confusion, I pen these words. I am grateful that you've read my humble prose. I hope that other young Chinese individuals from similar backgrounds can avoid my path, and I wish that my life experiences may inspire you. Let us engage in dialogue and identify solutions, so that our next generation need not repeat our tragic fate.